What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? Well, you get one of the most uncomfortable moments in late-night television history. Tonight, we're diving into the explosive confrontation that left audiences stunned, producers scrambling, and one legendary martial artist walking off set in the middle of a live taping. This is the story of how Chuck Norris went from beloved guest to persona non grata in less than 20 minutes. But before we get into this wild ride, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really caused this meltdown. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance. Chuck Norris, the man whose roundhouse kicks had become the stuff of internet legend, was there to talk about his new fitness program for seniors. What should have been lighthearted banter about staying in shape at 70 turned into something completely different when Fallon decided to veer off script. "So, Chuck, I have to ask," Jimmy began with that trademark grin. "Do you ever get tired of all the Chuck Norris jokes? You know, the ones about how you can slam a revolving door or count to infinity twice." Chuck shifted in his chair, his steely blue eyes narrowing slightly. "Jimmy, I've been hearing variations of those jokes for over a decade. They were funny at first, but honestly, they've gotten old." "Oh, come on." Jimmy chuckled, clearly not reading the room. "They're harmless fun. I mean, the internet loves you for it. You're like this mythical figure who can do anything." "That's exactly the problem," Chuck replied, his voice taking on an edge that anyone familiar with his films would recognize. "These jokes have reduced 40 years of martial arts dedication and military service to punchlines. I'm not a meme, Jimmy. I'm a person." The audience fell quiet. This wasn't the jovial back and forth they were expecting. Jimmy, perhaps thinking he could lighten the mood, reached under his desk. "Well, speaking of those jokes, we actually have a game prepared called Real or Fake Chuck Norris Facts. I'll read some statements, and you tell us if they're true or made-up internet humor." Chuck's jaw tightened visibly. "I'd rather not do that, Jimmy. Can we talk about the fitness program? That's why I'm here." "Oh, come on, Chuck. It'll be fun," Jimmy insisted, pulling out a stack of cards. "Our audience loves these games. Here's the first one. Chuck Norris doesn't do push-ups. He pushes the earth down. Real or fake?" The martial arts legend leaned forward in his chair. "Fake, obviously, and frankly, I find it disrespectful that you're treating my appearance like some kind of comedy bit. I came here as a professional to discuss something meaningful." Jimmy's smile faltered for just a moment before he forced it back. "Hey, we're just having some fun here. That's what we do on this show. Lighten up a little. Lighten up." Chuck's voice dropped to that dangerous quiet tone that had terrified countless movie villains. "Jimmy, I've spent my entire life building something meaningful. I've trained thousands of students, served my country, raised money for charities, and created programs to help kids stay out of gangs. But all anyone wants to talk about are these ridiculous made-up stories about me being some kind of superhuman cartoon character." The camera operators began to zoom in tighter, sensing that something significant was happening. Jimmy, either oblivious to the tension or determined to power through it, held up another card. Okay, I get it. How about this one? Chuck Norris can kill 2 stones with 1 bird." Chuck stood up from his chair. The movement was smooth, controlled, but unmistakably threatening in its precision. "Jimmy, I asked you politely to move on from this topic. Now I'm telling you." "Well there, partner," Jimmy said, his nervous laughter echoing through the studio. "We're live on television here. Let's just keep things friendly." "Friendly?" Chuck stepped closer to the desk. "Was it friendly when your producers promised we'd focus on my fitness program and then ambushed me with this juvenile nonsense? Was it friendly when you ignored my request to change topics? You want to see unfriendly, Jimmy?" The audience was dead silent. Now, you could practically feel the collective holding of breath. Jimmy's writers were probably frantically scribbling notes about how to salvage this disaster, but their host seemed frozen, still clutching his cards. "Chuck, please, let's just sit down and no," Chuck interrupted, his voice cutting through the studio like a blade. "I've been in this business long enough to know when I'm being disrespected. You brought me here under false pretenses. You've ignored my clearly stated boundaries, and now you're telling me to lighten up when I object to being treated like a joke." Jimmy finally seemed to grasp the severity of the situation. "Look, I apologize if Chuck's eyebrows shot up. There's no if about it, Jimmy. You did disrespect me. You are treating me like a novelty act instead of a guest. And frankly, your apology sounds about as sincere as a politician's campaign promise." The tension in Studio 6B was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jimmy Fallon, still holding those ridiculous game cards, was beginning to sweat under the studio lights. But Chuck Norris wasn't done. Not even close. "You know what the real joke is here, Jimmy?" Chuck continued, his voice eerily calm. "The real joke is that you think this is entertainment. You think reducing people to caricatures and making them dance like trained monkeys for your audience's amusement is somehow acceptable?" Jimmy tried to interject. "Chuck, I really think we should. I'm talking." Chuck cut him off with surgical precision. "You've had your chance to speak, and you used it poorly. Now it's my turn." The camera crew was getting some of the most compelling television in late-night history, but nobody in that studio was enjoying it. Chuck began pacing behind his chair, never taking his eyes off the host. "Do you know what I was doing when I was your age, Jimmy? I was teaching martial arts to underprivileged kids in Los Angeles. I was working with police departments to improve their defensive tactics. I was using whatever fame I had to make a real difference. But here you are making millions by turning people into punchlines. That's not fair," Jimmy finally managed to say, his voice noticeably higher than usual. "We celebrate people here. We make them feel special." Chuck actually laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Special? Is that what you call this? You want to make me feel special by reading fake facts about how I can strangle people with a cordless phone. The audience loves those jokes," Jimmy protested, gesturing toward the crowd. "They're laughing. Are they laughing now?" Jimmy Chuck asked, turning to face the completely silent audience. "Look around. Do you see anyone laughing? Or do you see a bunch of people who are deeply uncomfortable watching you disrespect a guest on live television?" Jimmy glanced at the audience and his face went pale. They weren't just quiet. They were staring in a mixture of fascination and horror. Some were recording with their phones. Others had their hands over their mouths in shock. "Chuck, please, let's just reset here," Jimmy pleaded. "We can start over. We can talk about whatever you want to talk about. Now, you want to talk about what I want." Chuck's voice dripped with disdain. "After I've asked you 3 times to change the subject. After you've made it clear that my comfort and dignity mean nothing to you as long as you get your cheap laughs." The martial arts legend moved closer to Jimmy's desk, and several security guards positioned around the studio tensed visibly. But Chuck wasn't making threatening gestures. He was just making his presence felt in that uniquely intimidating way that only comes from decades of disciplined training. "Here's what's going to happen, Jimmy," Chuck said, leaning forward slightly. "I'm going to walk out of here, and you're going to learn a valuable lesson about treating people with respect. Maybe next time you'll actually listen when a guest tries to redirect the conversation." "You can't just walk out," Jimmy said, desperation creeping into his voice. "We're live. We have 12 more minutes to fill." "Watch me," Chuck replied simply. "And Jimmy, next time you book a martial arts expert on your show, remember that we're trained to read people. We can see through fake smiles and hollow apologies. We know when someone is trying to manipulate us for their own benefit." Jimmy made one last attempt to salvage the situation. "Chuck, look, maybe I came on too strong with the jokes, but this is how we do things here. It's all in good fun. Can't we just laugh about this and move on?" Chuck stopped moving and turned to face Jimmy directly. The look in his eyes was something that probably hadn't been seen on late-night television since the early days of talk shows when hosts occasionally had to deal with genuinely dangerous guests. "Laugh about what exactly?" Chuck asked quietly. "Laugh about you ignoring my boundaries. Laugh about you treating me like a circus act. Laugh about you trying to gaslight me into thinking my legitimate concerns are unreasonable. What exactly should I find funny about any of this?" "I just meant," Jimmy stammered. "We could, chalk it up to a misunderstanding." "And this wasn't a misunderstanding," Chuck interrupted. "This was a choice. You chose to ignore what I wanted to discuss. You chose to push ahead with your prepared material, even when I clearly objected. You chose to prioritize your show's format over your guests' comfort. Those were all choices, Jimmy, and choices have consequences." The host looked around desperately, as if hoping his writers might somehow materialize with a magic solution to this disaster. But they were all watching from behind cameras and monitors, just as helpless as everyone else in the studio. "What do you want me to do here, Chuck?" Jimmy asked, his voice breaking slightly. "How do I fix this?" Chuck straightened up to his full height and adjusted his jacket. "You don't fix it, Jimmy. Some things can't be fixed with a joke or a smooth transition to commercial. Some things require actual accountability, actual change in behavior, actual respect for other people. And frankly, I don't think you're capable of any of those things." The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then Chuck did something that nobody expected. He turned to address the audience directly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying easily through the studio. "I apologize that you had to witness this. You came here expecting entertainment, and instead you got to see what happens when someone refuses to be treated with basic human dignity on national television." Chuck's direct address to the audience sent shock waves through the studio. This was completely unprecedented territory for a late-night talk show. Jimmy sat frozen behind his desk, unsure whether to try regaining control or just let this disaster play out. "You deserve better than this," Chuck continued, speaking to the audience as if Jimmy wasn't even there. "You deserve hosts who treat their guests with respect, who prepare thoughtfully for interviews, and who understand that real people with real accomplishments aren't just fodder for cheap comedy bits." Jimmy finally found his voice again, though it came out as more of a croak. "Chuck, please, can we just what, Jimmy?" Chuck wheeled around to face him. "Can we just pretend this didn't happen? Can we just sweep it under the rug and act like everything is fine? Is that your solution to every uncomfortable situation? Just ignore it and hope it goes away." The host was clearly out of his depth. Nothing in his comedy background or media training had prepared him for a guest who refused to play along with the carefully scripted chaos of late-night television. "I don't know what you want from me," Jimmy said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to be better," Chuck replied with devastating simplicity. "I want you to understand that the people who come on your show are human beings with feelings, boundaries, and dignity. I want you to realize that your platform comes with responsibility, not just opportunity." Chuck walked back toward his chair, but instead of sitting down, he picked up the microphone that had been clipped to his shirt and carefully removed it. The small action somehow felt more dramatic than any movie stunt he'd ever performed. "But mostly, Jimmy, I want you to explain to your audience why you thought it was acceptable to treat a guest this way. Not just me, but any guest. Explain to them why your entertainment is more important than basic human decency." Jimmy's mouth opened and closed several times without any sound coming out. The audience was still dead silent, hanging on every word of this unprecedented confrontation. "You can't explain it, can you?" Chuck continued. "Because there is no explanation. There's no justification for what you did here tonight. You brought me on under false pretenses. You ignored my clearly stated boundaries. You dismissed my concerns. And when I called you out on it, you tried to make me feel like I was the problem." The martial arts legend set the microphone down on Jimmy's desk with deliberate precision. "That's called gaslighting, Jimmy. It's a manipulation technique, and it's particularly ugly when someone in your position tries to use it on a guest." "Chuck, I swear I didn't mean." Jimmy started, but Chuck held up a hand. "Stop. Just stop talking. Every word that comes out of your mouth right now is making this worse. You've already shown everyone exactly who you are. Don't compound the damage by trying to talk your way out of it." Chuck turned once more to address the audience. "I've been in this business for over 4 decades. I've worked with directors, producers, and hosts who understood that respect is a two-way street. But I've also encountered people who think their position gives them license to treat others however they want. Tonight you've seen which category your host falls into. The camera operators were getting shots that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come." Chuck's calm, controlled demeanor was somehow more intimidating than any action sequence he'd ever filmed. "Jimmy," Chuck said, turning back to the host one final time, "I hope you learned something from this. I hope you take a long, hard look at how you conduct yourself and how you treat the people who trust you enough to appear on your show, because if you don't, you're going to keep having nights like this." Chuck began walking toward the edge of the stage, but Jimmy couldn't let it end like this. "Chuck, wait. Please, we can work this out. Don't leave like this." Chuck paused at the edge of the stage area and turned back. "Jimmy, some bridges can't be rebuilt once they're burned. You had multiple opportunities to change course tonight, and you chose not to take any of them. That's on you, not on me. The network is going to be furious," Jimmy said desperately. "This is going to be a nightmare for everyone." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to treat me like a dancing monkey," Chuck replied. "Actions have consequences, Jimmy. Sometimes those consequences are public, messy, and embarrassing. But there's still consequences." With that, Chuck Norris walked off the stage of The Tonight Show, leaving Jimmy Fallon sitting alone at his desk with 10 minutes of live television still to fill and an audience that looked like they just witnessed a car accident. Jimmy stared at the empty guest chair for a long moment, then looked directly into the camera. "Well, folks, that was Chuck Norris. Everyone, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back." But as the cameras cut away and the studio lights dimmed for the commercial break, everyone in that room knew they had just witnessed something unprecedented. Not just a guest walking off a talk show, but a complete dismantling of the artificial politeness and forced joviality that typically defines late-night television. Chuck Norris had just delivered a masterclass in standing up for yourself, and millions of viewers had watched it happen in real time. The clip would be viral within hours, analyzed by media critics and remembered as one of the most authentic moments in the usually scripted world of celebrity interviews. So there you have it, the complete story of how Chuck Norris turned what should have been a simple promotional appearance into a legendary television moment. What do you think? Did Chuck go too far, or was Jimmy completely out of line? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button for more incredible stories like this one. And let me know what other celebrity confrontations you'd like me to cover next.